Every morning at exactly 6:03 a.m., the old man would lift the metal shutter of the tiny coffee kiosk on platform 7. Rain or shine, weekday or weekend, he was always there. Buttoned-up sweater, beige cap, and hands steady despite the years. His name tag read only Leo. Passengers came and went in waves. They rushed, they yawned, they scrolled on phones. Most never made eye contact. To them, Leo was part of the architecture, a background figure who handed over coffee with a quiet, "Here you go." But to those who paid attention, the regulars who came every day, there was something different about him. He always remembered your order. Never used sugar unless you said the word twice. Never gave extra napkins. Never smiled unless you said please. But most curious of all, he never looked tired. Not in the way an old man on his feet for 10 hours should. A mistake that started it all. It began with a tourist, a college student from Belgium named Elias. She was filming clips for a social media vlog, underrated train stations of the world, or something close to that. She placed her phone on a bench to record a wide shot of platform 7. The footage ran for 5 minutes. Later, while editing the video in her hostel room, Elias paused a frame. There, in the background, barely visible between passengers, was Leo, standing absolutely still as the crowd blurred past. And yet he wasn't wearing the beige cap. He wasn't behind the counter. He wasn't in his kiosk at all. He was standing at the edge of the platform, eyes locked on someone, and one arm was raised, like a signal. Something about the posture seemed too intentional, too precise. She zoomed in. The video was blurry, but Elias posted it anyway. She captioned it. "This old man saved someone, didn't he? Look at the body language. Look at his eyes." Mystery man, found platform 7. True story, maybe. She didn't know she had just opened a door. The comment that shook everything for 2 days. Nothing happened. Then a comment appeared under the video. "I was there. That's the man who pulled me off the tracks in '93. I was 8. I trained kids 17. The comment was buried among dozens of others, but it stood out. Elias followed up. The user replied in private. He sent a scanned newspaper clipping from 1993. "Unidentified man rescues child from oncoming train, vanishes before police arrive." A grainy photo was attached. And in the background, though younger, thinner, it was him, Leo. Same posture, same calm, same eyes. The counter is quiet. The next morning, Ava Linden was at platform 7. She wasn't sure why. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. She had seen the video. She had read the article. Leo was there. He handed her coffee, said nothing. But when their hands touched, his grip was firm, cold, like a soldier's. She tried asking, "Were you ever in the army?" He didn't answer, just nodded once, and handed her a napkin folded perfectly into a triangle. Inside, written in careful handwriting, was a single line, "I didn't do it for headlines." The napkin stayed in Ava's pocket all day. She didn't know exactly why, but something about Leo's message unsettled her. It wasn't denial. It wasn't pride. It felt like closure that wasn't earned. Ava had spent the last 3 years uncovering quiet legacies, people who had done extraordinary things and then vanished into ordinary life. But Leo was different. He didn't vanish. He stayed. Every day, serving coffee as if none of it had happened. She returned to the station the next morning, this time with a plan. Finding the archive. The newspaper article from 1993 mentioned a blurry security tape. No one ever found the man because the video had been damaged in storage. Ava made a call to a retired transit cop she'd interviewed once. By that afternoon, she had access to a dusty records room 2 floors below Central Transit HQ. And there, between boxes labeled Fire Drill 1989 and maintenance logs Retired, was a tape. Label P7 Rescue 03 1993, corrupt, unusable. But Ava knew someone who could help. Restoring the past. In a cramped back room of an electronics shop in Midtown, a man named Nolan ran video recovery as a side hustle. He looked at the tape, then at Ava. "This thing's cooked, but not impossible," he sighed. "Give me 72 hours. If there's anything in here, I'll find it." A gesture repeated. Ava went back to platform 7 again. Leo was there. Same stance, same order, black coffee, no sugar. But something about him had shifted. He didn't flinch when she approached. "I found the article," she said. "I know about the boy." Leo didn't react, but then he did something strange. He took a coin, a simple metro token, and placed it upright on the counter, balanced perfectly. Then, softly, "You're asking the wrong question." "Then what's the right one?" "Why did I stop saving people?" Nolan's call. 3 days later, her phone lit up at 2:11 a.m. It was Nolan. "I need you to come see this, now." The tape that wasn't empty. The footage was grainy and warped, but the frames were there. The camera faced platform 7. A little boy stood at the edge of the platform, alone, looking for someone. The train approached, then movement. From the crowd, a man surged forward, not rushed, calculated. He swept the boy up in one motion, tumbled backward just as the train blurred into view. The boy cried. The man stood up, nodded at a nearby woman, then walked out of frame. But the final 3 seconds of the clip were different. The man turned toward the camera, just barely, and for the first time in decades, Leo's full face appeared. He looked younger, but the eyes were exactly the same. Calm, focused, sad. Ava leaned closer. She noticed something the others hadn't. A patch on his jacket, half faded but still visible. UN Mission Ops. Questions multiply back at home. Ava dug through her old files. UN special missions weren't something you found in civilian archives, but she had a source, a whistleblower who once fed her documents on diplomatic extractions. She reached out. UN Mission Ops? That's ghost-level clearance, the source said. Why? Because I think I found one. Impossible. Those guys don't retire. They disappear. Ava hesitated, then replied, "This one's been serving coffee for 29 years. Ava couldn't sleep. The video didn't just prove Leo's identity, it complicated everything. If he had once been part of a UN special mission unit, it meant his presence at the train station wasn't by accident. It meant he chose invisibility. But why? A name in the margins. She called her contact again the next morning. "I need more than a theory," she told him. "I need a name." There was silence on the line. Then, "You didn't hear this from me, but check the post-Bosnia debriefs. Look for initials, LS, or a field name, Lumen. That's all I'm giving you." Ava started digging through open-source scans of declassified Balkan mission records. Most names were redacted, but a few comments were left untouched. In the margins of one PDF, "Safe zone breached. Evacuation initiated by Lumen. Civilians secured. Unknown how he got in. Report 04B UN Cord 1994 Lumen. A man who had crossed enemy lines with no clearance, no orders, and pulled 12 people out of a siege zone, and then vanished." Back to Leo. She waited until the morning rush had ended to approach his counter again. "I saw the tape," she said. "I saw your face." Leo didn't blink. "You were Lumen." Silence. Ava leaned in. "You walked into a war zone without permission. You saved people who weren't on any list. That's not just bravery. That's disobedience." Finally, Leo looked up. "No. That's what happens when you realize the mission was never about the mission, the uniform." Ava asked the obvious next question. "Why the apron? Why the station?" Leo looked around. The hum of trains echoed above them, the hiss of machines, the sound of transit. Ava couldn't sleep. The video didn't just prove Leo's identity, it complicated everything. If he had once been part of a UN special mission unit, it meant his presence at the train station wasn't by accident. It meant he chose invisibility. But Why a name in the margins? She called her contact again the next morning. I need more than a theory, she told him. I need a name. There was silence on the line. Then, you didn't hear this from me, but check the post-Bosnia debriefs. Look for initials, LS or a field name, Lumen. That's all I'm giving you. Ava started digging through open-source scans of declassified Balkan mission records. Most names were redacted, but a few comments were left untouched. In the margins of one PDF, safe zone breached. Evacuation initiated by Lumen. Civilians secured. Unknown how he got in. Report 04B UN Cord, 1994 Lumen. A man who had crossed enemy lines with no clearance, no orders, and pulled 12 people out of a siege zone, and then vanished, back to Laoshi. Waited until the morning rush had ended to approach his counter again. I saw the tape, she said. I saw your face. Leo didn't blink. You were Lumen. Silence. Ava leaned in. You walked into a war zone without permission. You saved people who weren't on any list. That's not just bravery, that's disobedience. Finally, Leo looked up. No. That's what happens when you realize the mission was never about the mission. The uniformava asked the obvious next question. Why the apron? Why the station? Leo looked around. The hum of trains echoed above them, the hiss of machines, the sound of transit. After Bosnia, he said, I went back, not to the field, to the reports, debriefings, rooms full of men deciding who lived and who didn't. He paused. I couldn't be part of that anymore, but I also couldn't. Vanish, so I picked a place where people pass through every day, and I stayed. But you hid, Ava said. He shook his head. No, I just stopped shouting. That doesn't mean I stopped helping. Unconfirmed missions over the next week. Ava followed a new thread. Unconfirmed civilian rescues that occurred during Leo's disappearance years. 1997. A family in Kosovo reported being pulled from a convoy by an unidentified man with a metro accent. 2003. A diplomat's child found alive after disappearing in Istanbul, reportedly led to safety by a quiet man with sharp eyes. 2007. An anonymous call saved 4 refugees locked in a shipping crate in Newark. The voice in the call had no accent, just calm, clear instructions, all unconfirmed, all unsolved, all within Leo's travel radius, and each just days apart from a noticeable gap in his transit cafe schedule. One question remained. Why didn't he ever speak? Why live as a shadow when his name could have earned medals, honors, recognition? When Ava finally asked, Leo answered without hesitation, how to live. The train station was louder than usual. Tourists bustled with bags, the hum of announcements echoing through the concrete. But all Ava could hear was the sound of inaction, a ringing silence behind the noise, like a story trapped in a box no one dared to open. She had the footage, the old grainy video of a younger Leo, codenamed Lumen, sprinting across a war-torn courtyard, lifting a bleeding child into his arms while bullets ripped past overhead. She had the names of survivors. She had the location, the dates, the timestamps. She had everything, except one thing, official recognition. Leo had performed miracles, real ones, not just legends or exaggerated tales. Lives had been saved because he defied orders, and yet no one had ever thanked him, not officially, not on record, not with a medal, a headline, or even a single press mention. Why? A list without a name. Ava spent the next 3 nights digging. The old archives weren't easy to access, but she had help. An anonymous message arrived in her inbox, signed only with the letter R. Check the NATO Commendations Archive, years 95 to 97. Pay attention to the redacted entries. It took hours to break past the password walls, but finally she found them. Digitized PDFs of military honors, humanitarian distinctions, and commendation lists from the Balkan conflict. Dozens of medals awarded posthumously, citations for bravery under fire, some for acts less daring than Leo's. She searched page after page for Lumen, for LS, for any name that might fit his alias, even vague descriptors. Nothing, not a single match. Until she reached the final appendix, almost hidden. It wasn't a list, but a memo. One operative's actions exceeded mission parameters. Commendation blocked due to unsanctioned intervention. Memo Ref H77 Balkan blocked, not forgotten, erased, on purpose. Ava stared at the line. It was like reading a verdict on integrity. The very system that praised heroism had buried it when it didn't suit the narrative. The silent reason. She called her military contact again. Colonel Royce. They'd spoken once before, cautiously. This time, Ava's voice carried fire. Why wasn't Leo Lumen ever acknowledged? She demanded. A long pause on the other end. Because if we recognized what he did, Royce said finally, we'd also have to admit what we didn't, that we left people behind, that one man broke the protocol and made the rest of us look like cowards. He risked everything, Ava said. He saved dozens. Don't you see that? I do, the colonel replied. But medals aren't about truth. They're about politics. Ava hung up without another word. Leo's reaction. The next day, she returned to the kiosk. The air smelled of cinnamon pastries and coffee, a surreal contrast to the storm in her chest. Leo, she said, approaching the counter, they denied your medal, on purpose, to cover up their own failure. He was pouring a fresh pot of coffee. He didn't stop. I know, he said quietly. You knew? He nodded. That's why I left. You could have fought it, gone public, taken them to court. I could have, Leo said, his voice soft, but then I would have become the story, not the people I saved. He looked at her, eyes tired but kind. Do you know what the real reward is, Ava? That some of them still send postcards, not to Lumen, just to a man who made it out alive. That's more than any medal. The postcards. He reached below the counter and retrieved a weathered wooden box. It was heavy with time. Inside were postcards, dozens, worn at the edges, but clearly treasured. One had a crayon drawing of sunflowers. Another was written in faded ink, almost smudged by tears. He handed her one from a girl named Elira. Dear Leo, I plant sunflowers now, just like you taught me. Thank you for the seeds and for holding my hand when the trucks came. I hope you're safe. Love, Elira. Ava swallowed the lump in her throat. These were his medals, not displayed in glass cases, but carried in memory. Lived, not awarded. Another was from a man named Bojan. You told me to run left. I did. My brother didn't make it, but I did. I built a bakery in Zagreb, named it Lumen Bread. People ask what it means. I just say it means light. Each postcard was a chapter, a testimony, a truth. The hero the world refused Ava realized something. The world didn't ignore Leo because he wasn't a hero. The world ignored him because his kind of heroism didn't fit the mold. There were no slow-motion rescues, no perfect speeches, just mud, pain, defiance, and kindness. And when he returned, no parade, no flag, just a job pouring coffee to strangers who never knew the man behind the cup. She turned off her recorder. For once, this wasn't for a headline. It was for legacy. Ava's journal entry, unpublished. He isn't bitter. That's what amazes me. He's not angry. He's just still here, still kind, still watching the world pass by while holding on to lives most of us will never know. His kind of strength isn't loud, but it's the kind I want to remember. A quiet ending. For now. Before she left, Leo handed her a small envelope. Inside, a medal. Not official, not even military, just a round wooden token with a carving, for courage when no one was watching. Ava looked at him. He smiled. A child made it for me. After all these years, it's the only one I ever kept. A trail that shouldn't exist. The morning after Ava left the broadcast archive, she barely slept. Her dreams were riddled with trains, uniforms, a voice screaming through static. The image of Elias stepping between a baton and a child kept replaying in her head. It wasn't just what he did, it was the way he did it. Like someone who had done it before, like someone who was trained to. With a mug of coffee in hand and circles under her eyes, she opened her laptop and typed into the search bar, Elias Rosario, 1986, protests, arrest. Nothing. No news articles, no police reports, not even a blurry mention in comment sections or conspiracy forums. She widened the search. Then again. Eventually, she stumbled on a reference in a declassified public hearing transcript, a single sentence, almost throwaway. We were unable to locate a key witness from the Meridian Station incident, Elias R. It was from a 1987 session of a government inquiry committee. Ava sat back, chills spreading down her arms. If Elias had been at the center of something controversial, someone had made sure his name didn't linger in the records. And yet, here he was, serving coffee and mopping floors like he never existed before that day. How do you erase a man's past? She whispered. And why? The keeper of unwanted memories. The lead took her to a man named Gerard Minnis, a retired clerk who had once worked for the National Archives. A friend of Ava's father, he was known for keeping carbon copies of everything he touched, even after retirement. His apartment was a maze of stacked boxes, folders labeled with sharp black marker, and a cat that stared with suspicion. You're looking for a file that shouldn't exist? Gerard asked, arching an eyebrow. Exactly, Ava said. He didn't blink. That's half my living room. Hours later, buried under documents from long-forgotten commissions and misfiled inquiries, Gerard pulled out a thin manila folder with faded ink, E. Rosario, testimony, redacted. The file was incomplete. Large black bars crossed entire paragraphs, but the title page was intact. It named Elias as a witness of unauthorized military conduct during the unrest of March 3, 1986. Another page indicated he had been scheduled to testify in a closed session, but the hearing was suddenly cancelled. Why? The reason box was stamped. Security risk. Subject in non-compliance. It didn't make sense. Gerard leaned in. You see this? He said, pointing to the date at the bottom of the page. That's 2 days before the station explosion. Ava froze. Explosion? You don't know? He asked. In a dusty breath, Gerard explained. A bomb had detonated in Meridian Central Station on March 5, 1986. 2 were killed, 15 injured. It was blamed on radicals, but apparently one of the planned key witnesses went missing the same day. Rumor was he was the target. That witness, Elias, gone before the story could be told. Ava's head spun. If Elias was supposed to testify against military misconduct and the station where he worked was bombed, then his disappearance was not coincidence. She looked back at the redacted file. Something in her gut told her the truth wasn't just covered, it had been buried, and yet he came back, years later, quietly. Not as a whistleblower or martyr, but as a barista. Why? What made a man like Elias disappear for decades, only to return and serve coffee with a smile? She copied the entire file, scanned every page, and stored it on a secure drive. Then she stared at one photograph, a security still from 1986, showing Elias guiding 2 injured passengers out of the smoke. It was the same expression from the protest footage, focused, unafraid. But this time he was holding a child, and behind him there was a woman. Blurry, but unmistakable. Her hand clutched his coat. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen that woman before, in the background of one of the old station footage clips from the archive, a person Elias seemed to avoid talking about. This was no longer just about lost history. It was about someone Elias might have been protecting, someone still out there, the system that swallowed the truth, the T. Ava visited the National Archive building the next day, determined to request the full, uncensored version of Elias's testimony. But when she submitted the request, the clerk behind the glass window hesitated. "I'm sorry," he said. "That file no longer exists in our system." "But I have a copy of the index," Ava argued, sliding Gerard's scan through the opening. The clerk studied it, his eyes narrowed slightly. "I understand, but officially, this document was flagged for destruction." "When?" He checked the computer again. 2 years ago. By then, Elias was already back at the station, already pouring coffee, already looking like someone who had nothing left to hide or protect, except someone had clearly tried to erase him, twice, and failed. A message between the lines. Back home, Ava replayed the last footage again. She noticed something strange this time. At the end of the protest tape, just before the feed cuts off, Elias turns to the camera. Not directly, but just enough. He mouths something, 3 words. Ava slowed the footage, zoomed in, enhanced. It wasn't clear, but it looked like, "Find the girl." She blinked. The woman in the background, she wasn't random. She was the key. Someone Elias had risked his life for, someone he'd hidden for decades, and maybe, just maybe, someone who could finally tell the story he couldn't. A trail that shouldn't exist. The morning after Ava left the broadcast archive, she barely slept. Her dreams were riddled with trains, uniforms, a voice screaming through static. The image of Elias stepping between a baton and a child kept replaying in her head. It wasn't just what he did, it was the way he did it. Like someone who had done it before, like someone who was trained to. With a mug of coffee in hand and circles under her eyes, she opened her laptop and typed into the search bar, "Elias Rosario, 1986. Protests, arrest, nothing. No news articles, no police reports. Not even a blurry mention in comment sections or conspiracy forums." She widened the search, then again. Eventually, she stumbled on a reference in a declassified public hearing transcript. A single sentence, almost throwaway. "We were unable to locate a key witness from the Meridian Station incident, Elias R. It was from a 1987 session of a government inquiry committee." Ava sat back, chills spreading down her arms. If Elias had been at the center of something controversial, someone had made sure his name didn't linger in the records. And yet, here he was, serving coffee and mopping floors like he never existed before that day. "How do you erase a man's past?" she whispered. "And why? The keeper of unwanted memories." The lead took her to a man named Gerard Minnis, a retired clerk who had once worked for the National Archives. A friend of Ava's father, he was known for keeping carbon copies of everything he touched, even after retirement. His apartment was a maze of stacked boxes, folders labeled with sharp black marker, and a cat that stared with suspicion. "You're looking for a file that shouldn't exist?" Gerard asked, arching an eyebrow. "Exactly," Ava said. He didn't blink. "That's half my living room." Hours later, buried under documents from long-forgotten commissions and misfiled inquiries, Gerard pulled out a thin manila folder with faded ink, E. Rosario, testimony, redacted. The file was incomplete. Large black bars crossed entire paragraphs, but the title page was intact. It named Elias as a witness of unauthorized military conduct during the unrest of March 3, 1986. Another page indicated he had been scheduled to testify in a closed session, but the hearing was suddenly cancelled. Why? The reason box was stamped, security risk, subject in non-compliance. It didn't make sense. Gerard leaned in. "You see this?" he said, pointing to the date at the bottom of the page. "That's 2 days before the station explosion." Ava froze. "Explosion? You don't know?" he asked. In a dusty breath, Gerard explained. A bomb had detonated in Meridian Central Station on March 5, 1986. 2 were killed, 15 injured. It was blamed on radicals, but apparently one of the planned key witnesses went missing the same day. Rumor was he was the target. That witness, Elias, gone before the story could be told. Ava's head spun. If Elias was supposed to testify against military misconduct and the station where he worked was bombed, then his disappearance was not coincidence. She looked back at the redacted file. Something in her gut told her the truth wasn't just covered, it had been buried, and yet he came back, years later, quietly. Not as a whistleblower or martyr, but as a barista. Why? What made a man like Elias disappear for decades, only to return and serve coffee with a smile? She copied the entire file, scanned every page, and stored it on a secure drive. Then she stared at one photograph, a security still from 1986, showing Elias guiding 2 injured passengers out of the smoke. It was the same expression from the protest footage, focused, unafraid. But this time he was holding a child, and behind him there was a woman. Blurry, but unmistakable. Her hand clutched his coat. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen that woman before, in the background of one of the old station footage clips from the archive, a person Elias seemed to avoid talking about. This was no longer just about lost history. It was about someone Elias might have been protecting. Someone still out there, the system that swallowed the truth, the T. Ava visited the National Archive building the next day, determined to request the full, uncensored version of Elias's testimony. But when she submitted the request, the clerk behind the glass window hesitated. "I'm sorry," he said. "That file no longer exists in our system." "But I have a copy of the index," Ava argued, sliding Gerard's scan through the opening. The clerk studied it. His eyes narrowed slightly. "I understand, but officially this document was flagged for destruction." "When?" He checked the computer again. 2 years ago. By then, Elias was already back at the station, already pouring coffee, already looking like someone who had nothing left to hide or protect. Except someone had clearly tried to erase him, twice, and failed. A message between the lines. Back home, Ava replayed the last footage again. She noticed something strange this time. At the end of the protest tape, just before the feed cuts off, Elias turns to the camera. Not directly, but just enough. He mouthed something, 3 words. Ava slowed the footage, zoomed in, enhanced. It wasn't clear, but it looked like, "Find the girl." She blinked. The woman in the background, she wasn't random. She was the key. Someone Elias had risked his life for, someone he'd hidden for decades, and maybe, just maybe, someone who could finally tell the story he couldn't. A name with no past. The image had been grainy, but her outline was unmistakable. The woman clinging to Elias's coat as smoke filled the train station. She was younger then, maybe early 20s, but something about her posture, the urgency in her grip, suggested she wasn't just another bystander. Ava needed to identify her. Using facial recognition tools available through a journalist friend, Ava ran the blurry frame through a reverse search. Most results came up empty, but one partial match returned from an old ID badge issued to a university student in 1985. The name, Lucia Alvarez. There were no digital records of her after that year, no social media, no address, not even an obituary. It was like she had vanished. Ava cross-referenced student databases, class photos, and yearbooks. Finally, tucked away in an archived student newspaper, she found an interview. Lucia, a linguistics major, had spoken about her interest in underground languages and minority rights. The final sentence caught Ava's attention. In volatile times, words can save lives, if you know when not to speak them. Ava stared at the line, wondering if Lucia had learned that the hard way. She never boarded the train. Further digging revealed something odd. Lucia was scheduled to board a train out of Meridian on the day of the explosion, but she never arrived at her destination. She was listed among the presumed dead in the immediate aftermath, but no body was recovered, no memorial mention, and her family, it seemed, had never given a statement. Ava tracked down a cousin, Camila Alvarez, living in the outskirts of the capital, a retired nurse with silver hair and a quiet demeanor. At first, Camilla was wary. "I haven't heard that name in years," she said. Ava hesitated, then showed her the still image. "Is this her?" Camilla took a long, trembling breath, then nodded. "That's Lucia. I always suspected she didn't die. She sent me a letter, just once." "When?" Camilla opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope, yellowed and fragile. The postmark, June 1986, 3 months after the explosion. Inside, the message was short, in handwriting that trembled with urgency. "Don't look for me. I'm safe. He saved me." No signature, no address, just those words, a coded message. Ava copied the letter and took it home. That night, she compared the writing to Lucia's student articles. It matched, mostly, but there were odd capitalizations in the letter, strange patterns. Ava had seen this before, in wartime correspondences, in intelligence briefings disguised as mundane letters. Lucia had used a cipher. It took hours, but Ava cracked it. The capital letters, when strung together, formed coordinates, approximate ones, leading to a rural village near the northern border. And then, below the message, scribbled faintly into the bottom fold of the page, were 3 initials, E.R. Elias Rosario, the border town. The next day, Ava boarded a train heading north. The village was small, its name barely visible on the faded sign at the edge of the station platform. There was one inn, one general store, and a church. Locals were cautious, kind but reluctant to talk, until an old man behind the counter in the store recognized the photograph. "She used to live in the greenhouse near the hill," he said, "stayed out of sight. Didn't even give us her name. Just helped the priest and taught kids to read." Ava walked up the hill and found the house, abandoned now, overgrown with ivy, but intact. Inside, it smelled of dust and pine. Books were scattered on a low shelf. Children's drawings still clung to the fridge. One showed a woman with long hair standing beside a tall man in a uniform, with a coffee cup in his hand. Elias. They had lived here together, hidden, quiet, and then, just as suddenly as they had come, they were gone. Why she disappeared. In the back room, Ava found a notebook sealed in plastic. It wasn't a diary, it was a list. Names, dates, small comments in the margins. Train route 3 secured. Warned Thomas, he crossed anyway. Message passed through El Correo. It read like a log of movements, warnings, messages relayed, quiet resistance, and in one final entry, "If they ever come looking, show them who he was, but only when it's safe." It was signed. L.A. Ava clutched the book to her chest. Lucia hadn't just survived. She and Elias had formed an underground network, using coffee routes, station workers, and back doors through public systems to protect dissidents, students, even refugees during the unrest. They used language, train schedules, and seemingly mundane jobs to camouflage an entire resistance thread. Elias wasn't just a hero in a single protest. He had been part of something much bigger, something silent, intentional, and entirely off the record. The legacy hidden in plain sight. Back in the city, Ava stared at the coffee counter Elias had stood behind for years. Every day, quiet, invisible. She understood now why he never spoke about the past, why the file had been erased, why his name was lost and Lucia's vanished, because some heroes don't need applause. They just need to finish the mission. The small room above the train station cafe was silent, too silent for someone like Elias, whose hands never seemed to stop moving. But on that day, he sat still, staring at the dusty television screen Ava had placed on the table. It showed his younger self, speaking a language not many people in this town even recognized. Ava leaned forward. "It's you. There's no denying it now. You were addressing a crowd, hundreds of people. You had a voice back then, Elias." He didn't answer right away. He only blinked slowly and reached for the worn handkerchief he always kept in his pocket. It was embroidered with a name, Zana, the language without a flag. Ava had spent the past week tracing the symbols from the tapes, connecting the dialect Elias spoke to a suppressed minority from decades ago. The language didn't belong to any current country. It had been banned once, not written, not taught, only whispered. "You weren't just speaking," she said gently. "You were leading." Elias exhaled, long and heavy. "It was the only time I ever used that voice for something that mattered," he said, and slowly he began to tell the story he had buried. The revolution that wasn't televised. He came from a village where even silence had accents, where stories were passed down not in books but in ballads and riddles. In his 20s, he'd become a translator, first for business travelers, then for journalists, and finally for dissidents. But one day, something changed. A peaceful protest had erupted after a local teacher was arrested for teaching children in their native tongue. Elias had been there, not as a protester, but to translate a message that would be broadcast by pirate radio. He had resisted at first, but when the appointed speaker was arrested on the way to the station, someone handed Elias the microphone, and he spoke. Not just the prepared speech, but his own truth, about a people who had lived invisible for too long. About a mother who had died nameless in a hospital where no one understood her. About a brother disappeared in the middle of the night. That broadcast didn't air long. Authorities cut the transmission within minutes. But the recording, it survived. The video Ava had found was a backup, likely hidden by someone who believed in what Elias said that night. Names on the wall. In Ava's bag was a folded sheet of paper. On it were names. Some Elias recognized, others he didn't. "These are the people who credited that broadcast with saving their lives," she said. "They escaped because of the warning. Some formed communities in other countries. Some became professors. Others, well, one even became a senator." Elias looked at the list, his fingers trembling. "I never thought." "You never knew what that moment became," Ava said. He nodded, eyes misted. "I gave them a voice, but I thought I lost mine in return." The letter he never sent from under his bed, Elias retrieved a rusted metal tin. Inside was a yellowed envelope, never sealed. He handed it to Ava. The letter was addressed to the Committee for Cultural Truth. Inside, a single sentence. "If I disappear, know that I chose silence not from fear, but to keep the echoes of our language alive somewhere, somehow." A crowd of strangers. Later that week, Ava organized a gathering. Not a protest, something quieter, more deliberate. Held in the back of the station cafe, word of the event spread through forums, message boards, and old mailing lists. On the night of the gathering, people showed up, young and old. Some carried worn books, others wore pins with faded symbols. Some had traveled across state lines just to be there. Elias didn't want to speak. He didn't have to. One by one, others did. A man told the story of how he recognized Elias's voice on the video, how that voice warned his family before authorities swept their district. A woman recalled hearing Elias's words on a smuggled cassette during a lonely night in exile. And then, from the back of the room, a girl stepped forward and said, "I learned my grandmother's language because of you. I thought it was lost forever. When the echo comes back, Elias stayed seated through it all, his hands on his knees, quiet. But then he stood. No speech, no announcement. He simply sang, a lullaby, one that hadn't been sung in public for over 30 years. The room went silent, and then a voice joined, then another. The song didn't need translation. It was a memory, it was resistance, it was a return. The coffee still pours. The next morning, the station cafe opened as usual. Elias was back behind the counter, pouring coffee, humming a soft tune. A few regulars noticed the change, not in what he said, but in how he carried himself, a bit taller, a bit lighter. On the chalkboard outside, Ava had written something new. The quietest voices often carry the longest echoes. The video had done more than reveal Elias' past. It had lit a spark that no one expected. Emails began flooding in. Messages arrived through back channels, encrypted servers, even handwritten letters sent to the station's old post office box. Ava read them in quiet disbelief, forwarding some to Elias, others to historians, and a few to her own locked folder labeled Echoes. They were from people who remembered, not just the speech, but the silence that followed and what it had cost. A map of names. One morning, Ava laid out a massive paper map on the cafe floor. It was blank, except for borders of a now defunct country. One whose languages had been erased, rewritten, redrawn. She began to mark it. Blue pins for families that had fled. Green pins for teachers fired for speaking their native tongue. Red pins for disappearances, those who had vanished in the decade that followed the broadcast. And then gold pins for survivors who had written in to say, "I heard him." By the end of the day, the map looked like it had bled into itself, threaded with color, with memory, with trauma and survival braided into every inch. Elias looked at it in silence. "They called us scattered," he said, "but we were only waiting to connect again." The librarian's list. A few weeks later, an elderly woman stepped into the cafe. She wore a long grey coat, mismatched earrings and a satchel patched with the old flag of the suppressed nation. She introduced herself in the forbidden tongue. Elias responded without hesitation. The conversation unfolded like a secret melody. Ava stood by, listening as best she could. Later, the woman handed over a list, thin, yellowed pages bound with string. "We kept track of those who memorized the broadcast," she explained, "because we couldn't write it down." They had called themselves the Whisper Keepers. Each person had memorized one paragraph of Elias's message, in case it was lost, in case the video was destroyed, in case Elias himself disappeared. They had become a living archive. The Night of the Hands. Ava had a strange idea. What if they recreated it? Not the video, not the broadcast, the network. She called it the Chain of Quiet Hands. An online stream would go live for exactly 17 minutes and 32 seconds, the length of Elias' original transmission. Instead of a single speaker, people from around the world would recite one sentence each. Different accents, different countries, all speaking the same forgotten language. They had 144 lines to fill. Within 48 hours, over 300 people volunteered, preparing Elias. Elias at first resisted. He didn't like cameras or microphones or attention. "What I said back then, it wasn't meant for the world." "It was," Ava corrected. "That's why they tried to bury it." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, and sat down in front of the camera. No script, just him. He didn't re-perform the speech, he just introduced it. "Amma, what you're about to hear was never supposed to survive. But it did, not because of me, but because of those who remembered, those who carried it, those who became the voice when mine fell silent." He paused. "This isn't a broadcast, it's a memory, passed hand to hand, breath to breath. the broadcast that never died. When the stream went live, it was late at night in some countries, dawn in others. Faces filled the screen one by one. Elders with trembling voices, teenagers with digital filters, middle-aged teachers, poets, construction workers, musicians, parents holding children. Each spoke a single sentence in a language the world had tried to erase. And Elias sat in the cafe watching, tears rolling down his cheeks, not one of sadness, but of homecoming, the flag with no country. After the stream, a small design began circulating online. A circle of hands, each a different shade, forming a spiral. Inside the center, a single line from Elias's original speech. They thought silence would make us forget, but silence taught us how to remember. The spiral became a symbol, not of nationalism, not of vengeance, but of voice. Schools printed it on walls. A protester carried it on a cardboard sign in a march against language suppression in another country entirely. And someone, somewhere, made buttons. One showed up pinned to Elias's apron the next week. He never said where he got it. The cup that waited. One regular, an old man who never said much, asked Elias for coffee as usual. But this time, before leaving, he placed a sealed envelope on the counter. "My daughter speaks again," he said softly. "She found her words watching your stream. Thank you." Elias waited until the cafe was empty, then opened the envelope. Inside was a photo. A girl in her teens, eyes fierce with determination, standing in front of a chalkboard filled with symbols Elias hadn't seen in years. She was teaching, from hands to branches. Ava compiled everything into a digital archive: testimonies, maps, translations, transcripts of the chain of quiet hands, and fragments of the outlawed language. She didn't publish it as a history. She titled it, "A Manual for Remembering." It was downloaded over 40,000 times in the first week, translated into 7 languages. Teachers began requesting printed versions. In one interview, Ava simply said, "History isn't what survives in books, it's what survives in people." The letter arrived without a return address. Elegant parchment, gold-trimmed edges, the seal of a government that, until recently, had refused to acknowledge the very video that had changed everything. Now, in its new era of reconciliation, it extended an invitation. In recognition of his historic contribution to the cultural and democratic legacy of our people, we hereby invite Mr. Elias Dobre to receive the Medal of National Voice, our highest civilian honor. It was signed by the President herself. Ava stared at it, stunned. Elias placed the letter on the cafe counter as if it were a forgotten receipt. "You're going, right?" she asked. Elias gave a small smile, eyes distant. "They want to reward the version of me that survived, not the one they tried to erase." The parade that waited. Preparations were already underway. News stations reported on the quiet barista who once defied a regime. Journalists begged for interviews. Former exiles returned, hoping to witness history. Ava walked into the cafe one morning and found 3 reporters seated, sipping nervously, waiting to ask questions Elias never answered. He only poured their coffee. Nothing more. Behind the counter, a bulletin board had become crowded with messages. Children had drawn him in crayons. Others had printed the chain of quiet hands spiral symbol. One note stood out. "You taught me my grandparents weren't ghosts. Thank you." The ceremony. The Capitol prepared the hall. Velvet seats, glass podium, flags. A translator rehearsed the speech in both official languages, the current one, and the one Elias had spoken the day he lit the fuse. But the night before the ceremony, Elias vanished, not entirely. Ava found him just before sunrise, sitting on the same bench at the edge of the train platform where the station cafe first opened. He was watching the morning light spill over the tracks. "I was never meant to be on a stage," he said. She sat beside him, waited, then finally, "If I go, they'll clap for me, but I didn't say what I said for applause. I said it so no one else would be erased the way we were." Ava placed a single cup of black coffee between them. No sugar, no milk, exactly how he used to drink it before memory returned. "Then say that," she whispered, "what he did instead." The hall filled. Officials sat stiff in rows, cameras rolled, a velvet box containing the medal rested on a satin pillow. Elias didn't walk to the podium. Instead, a video played. He had filmed it in the cafe, plain shirt, apron, the spiral pin on his chest. "Thank you for this recognition, but I must decline. Because a medal speaks once, but silence, when shared, speaks forever. I accept only this, that our language be taught again, that our erased poets be read, that our history be written by those who lived it. You call me a hero. I was only a voice. The real heroes were the ones who passed it on." Then, just before the video ended, he added, "If you truly wish to honor me, put the medal in the Museum of Memory, not under my name, under ours." The crowd's reaction. There was silence, no applause, just stillness. And then, one by one, people stood, not clapping, just standing, in silence, a gesture they had inherited from a time when even clapping had been dangerous. After. The medal was placed not in the Hall of National Heroes, but in a new wing, La Sala de los que no gritaron, the room of those who didn't shout. It sat beneath a photo of Elias serving coffee, not during the speech, not during the chain of hands, just smiling behind the counter, as if saying, "You don't have to shout to change the world." The last train. It was a quiet morning. The station buzzed with the usual rhythm. Commuters, announcements, distant train whistles. But something was different. A subtle shift in the air, as if the walls themselves knew that the story had come full circle. Ava returned alone. No cameras this time, no press, just her, a notebook, and the familiar scent of fresh espresso from the corner where Elias used to stand. The coffee stand was closed now. The shutters were down, and taped to the front was a simple note, handwritten, "For every morning shared, for every silent thank you. E." The locker. No one opened. She approached the old staff lockers at the far end of the hallway, ones rarely used anymore. An attendant, one of Elias's former co-workers, handed her a key. "He left it for you," the woman said. "Said you'd understand what to do with it." The key opened a rusted locker. Inside, a box wrapped in an old station map, tied with a ribbon. Ava took it out, unwrapped it carefully, and found photographs, train tickets, and a worn notebook. The photos showed faces. Some Ava recognized from interviews, others unknown. In the margins of the notebook were dates, times, and small comments. June 1982, he crossed the border limping, carried a book, not a gun. 1991, she was shaking, hid the baby under her coat. I said nothing, she nodded. He had documented it all. The ones he helped, the ones he couldn't, and the moments that kept him going. The station's secret role. Through Elias's notes, Ava uncovered what the station really was for him. A sanctuary, a place between worlds. He never chose it randomly. It was where he first hid from those who hunted him. Later, it became where he helped others hide. He had used the back corridors, employee schedules, train delays, every element of the station's chaos to move people through it unnoticed. It was never just a job. It was the mission continuing in silence. One last broadcast. Ava recorded one final episode. She filmed the locker, the photos, the coffee stand. She didn't speak over the footage. Just a simple narration at the end. He could have run. He didn't. He stayed in plain sight, not for the recognition, but because there was still work to do. And now his story belongs to all of us. The episode, titled "The One Behind the Counter," went live 2 weeks later. Not as a viral spectacle, but as a quiet goodbye. No cinematic score, just the ambient sounds of the train station and one final image, the coffee stand, now reopened by a young barista. A small frame sat by the espresso machine. Inside it, a photo of Elias, mid-smile, holding out a cup of coffee. A letter to Ava. In the notebook was one final note addressed to her. Ava, stories like mine don't need explosions to echo. They just need someone who listens long enough. You listened. If you ever wonder why I stayed, remember this: silence saves more than shouting ever will. Elias, what the station kept. The station that once ignored man's stage now carried traces of him everywhere. A bench engraved with "To the ones who serve more than coffee." A mural near the lockers showing a train moving into light, its shadow carrying silhouettes of people holding hands. And every now and then, someone would ask about the man in the picture behind the counter. The barista would answer, "That's Elias. He saved lives here every day, one cup at a time." If you were moved by Elias's story, share it. Not for him, he never asked for the spotlight. But for those still out there, doing the invisible work, the quiet heroes behind counters, on night shifts, or walking beside us unseen. Subscribe to Hidden Past for more true stories that history nearly forgot. Like the video to support unsung heroes. And tell us, have you ever met someone who quietly changed everything?